What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another video here on Salt City Euros. So it has been quite a while since we've worked on the E91, so it is time. The front suspension is in pretty bad shape. It feels like the shocks are blown, and on top of that, the maybe one or two front control arms are just not doing their job anymore. I feel a slight pull and a wobble depending on the street conditions on the front end of the car. So it's time to start digging in there, and I figured before I buy more shocks, I should probably use some of the things that I have laying around the house. So I have these coilovers that I bought probably 2 years ago. I have this AP Sport Fahrwerk Coilover set, which I bought from tunershop.de or tunershop.com. They actually ship to the United States. That's how I got these. And they're somewhat of a lower, mid, somewhere range coilover. I don't know, they're definitely not high end, but they're definitely not cheap, you know, $250 or $300 coilovers. I think these were roughly $700, so that kind of puts them on the lower end of like a ST suspensions coilover set. So yeah, we'll see how these perform. Let's get this going. Okay, so here's the thing, guys. Right in there, up top is where the shock goes into the body. And as you can see, there are no bolts or nuts that are accessible from the wheel well. Usually there's like a type of rubber top mount, which can be bolted from the body. But it looks like that there's only one holding it onto the body, which is this threaded long stud. And apparently it goes in right there. So I think I'm gonna have to remove this entire trunk piece as well as on the other side. This is even more covered, as you can see between the two right there. This has an additional covering. So this is all gonna have to come out in order for me to be able to access the top mounts of the rear shocks. Wow, so I will say I'm usually not too negative about the process for doing things on cars, but I will say that I find the touring versions of these cars, the rear is unnecessarily a nightmare to even access the top shock mounts. So you can see here's the first one, and then here is the second one, and this took really long. You know, it's extremely difficult to not break little plastic mounting clips, and I just find it extremely unnecessary how difficult it is to do a somewhat routine maintenance job, because it's not like shocks are never going to have to be replaced. They will at some point. So I don't know, I mean, I'm not a engineer by any means, but I feel like they could have put a little bit more effort into making these rear sections semi easily accessible. Who knows, maybe with a flap, or I just can't imagine it would be that difficult to just simply add another flap somewhere here that, you can just open up and then you can have access to these shock mounts. But like I said, I'm not an engineer, so I'm just gonna zip it and we're gonna continue installing these coilovers. Okay, so the rear shocks are out. I wanted to show you guys a quick comparison between a Bilstein unit and then a AP Gewindefahrwerk or AP Sport Fahrwerk. You can definitely see how much thicker the Bilstein product is, and one thing that really concerns me in terms of the mounting and dismounting of the shocks is you can see here there's a little provision for a wrench to go on and hold it while you're undoing the bottom mounting nut, while this one doesn't have it. So this is going to be tricky and probably really painful to install into the bottom mount. Now you'll also notice that the AP Gewindefahrwerk unit is a little bit shorter. That's probably because it's meant for lowering, while the Bilstein is, I don't know, a little bit longer, not much. All right guys, this is the finished product for the rear. Got the spring in, got the little seat that adjusts the height. I set it at halfway, just as a starting point. Got the shock in. Like I said, the bottom did end up causing me quite a bit of trouble. The whole shock assembly would be twisting as I was trying to tighten that bottom nut. I haven't even torqued it yet, but it was really a pain in the butt to install. So just as an FYI, that's going to be something you have to look out for. So I'm going to torque down all the bolts, the bottom mount, my eccentric bolt back here for the camber adjustment, and then the top mount bolt as well. Make sure you do that. Very important, especially on suspension and engine components, to always torque to spec. I'll put all the torque specs in the description. I always do that in all the videos where I work on cars, so make sure you check those out. All right, time for the front. In theory, the front end should be very easy to take apart and reassemble. We have brackets that are holding the ABS sensor, the brake line, as well as potentially the brake pad wear sensor in place. They are attached by a bolt which goes through the knuckle, which also pinches the knuckle together and holds the whole shock assembly in place. We also have the sway bar end link on the back side here that needs to be removed. And then, last but not least, there are 3 nuts up top in the engine bay that are holding the whole assembly to the body of the car. So again, in theory, pretty easy. Take it out, put the new one in, bolt everything back up, torque down, and we should be good to go. Okay, so just a quick FYI, as soon as I started loosening that large bolt that pinches the knuckle together, the knuckle started sliding down. I just pushed on it a little bit with my foot and the whole knuckle dropped down, and pretty much the shock assembly, the strut assembly at this point, is just hanging freely. So I don't know if that'll be the case in your case, but in my case, that's what happened. So I'm not entirely sure if you need to remove that bolt 100%. It's nice if you don't. But it seems like it opened the knuckle just enough to release the upper shock assembly, and yeah, that saves me some time, effort, and now we can remove those top 3 nuts that I was telling you guys about. Another thing I need to mention really quickly, so these are the 3 nuts that are holding the whole shock assembly in place. As you can see, this one is underneath what I believe is a strut tower reinforcement bar of some sorts. I'd prefer not to remove it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to, but I'm gonna give it a try. Again, I don't know if this works, if it'll work for you, but otherwise you're gonna have to remove that strut bar, and we might actually end up having to do that as well. So let's find out what happens. Okay, so I was able to cheat my way out of probably having to do it the proper way, which would include removing this bar, but I was able to remove that rear nut without any problems really. So at this point, the whole shock assembly is gonna drop down, so make sure you reach and hold it so it doesn't drop on the floor. Okay, so as you guys can see, it's extremely important to use spring compressors, because even though I compressed these springs quite a bit already, there was a little bit of tension on that top mount. So you definitely don't want to do this without spring compressors, because otherwise, pew, that top mount goes flying and bolts and nuts and everything just goes everywhere. So be safe. Now the nice thing about coilovers is that usually the spring is a lot shorter. So as you could see, I was able to just assemble the whole thing by hand. I spun the coilovers all the way down because it makes it easier to install that top hat. The spring is nice and short. And then on top of that, if you just adjust it all the way down, there's really no resistance and no danger. You can just easily tighten the top mount down and then either install it or outside the car, adjust the coilover to where you want it to be. But the installation is a lot easier than the removal. All right, so I also have a special tool that I'm using. It has a special cutout where you can fit an Allen wrench in, and that way you're not forced to use an impact and potentially damage any of the components while you're tightening. So it just basically slides into the top with the Allen wrench in place, and the Allen wrench will prevent the shaft from spinning while you're able to apply torque and tighten the top nut properly. Looks great, all done. Let's go install this thing. Awesome, so that's a lot better. I think I'm gonna leave it like this for now. As I mentioned, the suspension is still gonna settle quite a bit. So in the meantime, I'm not gonna worry about getting an alignment. I know that's not necessarily the best thing to do, but I need this car as a daily driver currently. But once I am 100% happy with the way the car sits and the suspension is settled, then I'm gonna get an alignment done. And I suggest that you do the same. Always get an alignment after messing with your suspension components. It's simply cheap insurance against wearing out your tires. Do remember that on the driver's side, there are leveling sensors for your headlights. I just remembered that because I was working on this side, I never showed those, but you gotta really pay attention to those leveling sensors and do not damage them. Get them out of the way and then reattach them when you're done with all your suspension modifications. So that's it. That's how you lower your E90, E91, potentially E92 and E93 as well. I don't know. I'm gonna put back together the rear of the car, the trunk area, because that was a huge mess. Torque down my wheels, take it for a little spin, make sure everything feels nice and good. And guys, I will see you in the next video.